What's up, everyone? Thralls of Metal back again. I am Shredlord.
Necrotic Nick.
And we are here today to bring you a retro review, or in this case, being a few albums, more like a retrospective on a way overdue band, Dissection.
Yeah, I've been meaning to do this one for a long time as, well, at least two of these albums are really influential, and then the other one exists, and we'll talk about it. I'm going to go ahead and say trigger warning on this one, just because this is 90s Scandinavian black metal, and, well, yeah, it's 90s Scandinavian black metal, which means pretty much if you don't have a felony in whatever band you're in during that era, you're clearly not cult or true. And believe me, we're going to go into some really dark stuff here. But first, we're going to go into the formation of this band, or the early roots. And a lot of it, of course, centers around the focal member here, and the guy that we're definitely going to be talking about all throughout here, John Nodveit. But before that, John was actually in a thrash band called Sirens Yell with drummer Ola Ullman. This band was rounded out by vocalist Peter Palmdahl and bassist Matthias Johansson. They recorded one demo in 1988 and then broke up in 1989, and all of them would end up joining essentially like a neighboring thrash band called Rabbit's Carrot. I don't understand that name, but I've heard plenty of weird names doing this, so, whatever. Those guys would record two demos with that band. Now it was around this time that John, he definitely wanted to create something different. I don't think he was like the primary songwriter in Rabbit's Carrot. He wanted to write some more dark, sinister music, and kind of on the side, he was working on, his own material with drummer Ole. And, well, he kind of presented it to Rabbit's Carrot, like, hey, what do you think about this? And they were like, this is maybe a little too dark for what we're going for here, which inevitably led to John leaving the band. But this is where Dissection really kind of started getting rolling. It was pretty much in autumn of '89. John actually got Peter to join on bass, and then the following year, Ole kind of came back and said, hey, I'm kind of free to play drums. It was not long after that the three-piece here recorded their Severed into Shreds demo and sent it out to a bunch of fanzines in October of '90, and they got to play their first live show opening for Entombed.
What a hell of a first show.
I mean, dude, like 1990, we're talking like Left Hand Path, like, yeah, that's a moment.
That's a come-up, as the kids say. That is a come-up.
Now, during this time, Matthias actually stepped in to play live as their second guitarist, which kind of filled out their sound a little bit more, but he didn't officially join the band. He was just sort of there as a live player for them. And still as a three-piece, they would go and record their first official demo, The Grief Prophecy, in December of 1990. And then not long after that, guitarist John Zwetslut, I think I got that right.
Sweatslut. John Sweatslut.
That was actually Jammin' John's going name for a little bit, but, it was like, that one's going to be kind of tricky to get past, like, the ad revenue people. Anyway, in January of 1991, he would officially join as their second guitarist, and then not long after their very first live show with him, they were offered a record deal, or at least one for an EP with Corpse Grinder Records, no relation. And they would release their EP Into Infinite Obscurity. Now on April 8th, 1991, black metal suffered, one of its big casualties. Dead from Mayhem passed away. Not going into the details there. You can see it on an album cover if you really want. But it was during that time that they actually did a tribute show to him. They actually played Freezing Moon in Sweden, and they added it to a tribute album, I believe. I don't think it was like officially released on any of their EPs. But this gave them some respect in Norway. And that pretty much led to John joining the infamous Black Circle with Euronymous and his other collection of edgelords. And yeah, they now had some clout in the black metal scene, even though at this point I would still say that this band was, still a little bit on the thrashier side, and, with elements of death metal too. But yeah, at this point here, the band is full-on demoing material for a full length that, they were just working on all throughout 1992. And that would lead them to sign a one-album deal with No Fashion Records later that year. And then they recorded this debut album in 6 days in March of 1993. Way to get at it. And on December 3rd of 1993, they would release their debut album, The Somber Lane. This was produced by the legendary Dan Swano, whose production I've been in love with. Well, pretty much starting with like a lot of the death metal stuff that he did, but just a well-rounded producer in general. Raw, but well mixed. And I frequently say that Dissection in general is sort of that bridge between melodic death metal and like second wave black metal. And this is probably the album where I'd say that is most apparent, because across this album you have cold, icy black metal riffs. very grim vocals, but tons and tons of melodic harmonies that would not sound out of place on an early At the Gates or In Flames album.
Yeah, upon first listen to this, which is really the first time I ever really dove into Dissection was for this retro review, I kind of thought to myself, how have I not heard this before? It was really, really good and a fun listen. This album specifically was pretty cool. Right from the get-go, it kind of has a, like you're swirling your mom's Carpenter albums looking for the hidden messages of Satan within it. Before it kicks off, I thought that was kind of funny. Made me think of that little Nicky part where, he put Chicago on and it's like, you will slaughter the blood of the innocent. It's like, no shit, Chicago. That was kind of cool. I put down, to me, it was like if Mayhem and early Opeth had a baby and it played with a friend that really liked Dark Throne. And yeah, all those bands are incredibly awesome. The mix of just blackened brutality, although it was brutal, it was very clean and precise. Everything was very clean and precise.
Yeah, this didn't really scream like the very raw side of like second wave black metal. Like, it was meticulously crafted. The riffs were intricate. Tons of harmonized riffs everywhere. And the thing that I love in terms of black metal, what always kind of gets me is I like riffy black metal. And oh my God, this album is riffy as fuck.
And not only was it the excellent tight black metal riffs, it was their use of melodic parts throughout it that really make Dissection a special band, because they were able to incorporate very melodic passages that never felt corny or cheesy, but always just kind of felt dark and somber and enhanced everything that came before it and everything that came after it in the song.
And musically, I feel like this band had kind of an edge over a lot more like the more raw sounding black metal that's coming out of Norway. Like, this had more in common with, I would say, like Emperor more so than anything else. Like, this, has tropes that, you'd hear on like Night Side Eclipse in terms of like more lavish arrangements, dynamics in terms of like, peaks and valleys in the songs. Like the first two tracks, right? Not counting the intro or whatever. Like, yeah, it's whatever. But Black Horizons and the title track are 15 minutes of just intense, amazingly arranged music that balances just outright savagery with just brilliant melodies. The songs are epic, but again, they soar, but like with bat wings, like not like angelic wings at all, because this is black metal. It's just not allowed. You can still hear like a little bit of their like more leftover thrash from their earlier years. Heaven's Damnation in particular, lots of nasty, thrashy, very aggressive riffs. And there's even some nods of like Black Sabbath, like some old school kind of like more doomy sounds to it. And this one, more so than I would say any of their other albums, still has a lot of death metal on it.
Yeah, it's loaded with death metal. At first I thought maybe dripping, but dripping's a little too much, and it's a little gooey, and I'm not one for goo, unless I'm the one gooing.
Death metal is where the slime live.
That is very touche, sir. The one thing that I can talk about this album as well that kind of caught me off guard was their use of like those old school In Flame clean acoustic pieces. There's 3 acoustic pieces that are very throwback and reminiscent of like Jester's Race kind of sections where you have just this clean kind of classical flamenco-y type guitar. And while it was cool to give the album little breaks in between, it did seem odd sometimes that it would just be like a minute of like a riff or two of that and then go back into the next song.
It's well played. Like, I will give it that. I'm, again, not like the big interlude person. Generally, you'll hear me bitching about interludes. Like,
he's the anti-interlude man.
And, I don't mind when it's incorporated into a song, but as a separate track, that's something else. And, for me, like, I don't know, it just kind of felt like filler, like kind of padding it out. Like, yeah, I'm sure, they're good in transition or whatever, but I wanted to get back down the music. And again, kind of towards the back of the album, I felt like it had a completely different character. In the Cold Winds of Nowhere, The Grief Prophecy / Shadows over Lost Kingdom, and Mistress of Bleeding Sorrow, these are the songs I feel like the death metal elements really shine. Especially on In the Cold Winds of Nowhere. The opening to that song, there's a little bit of death there. Like the harmonies feel, a little bit more, grimy and, like sinister, but like in a zombie sinister, not like some frozen satanic ghoul in the Swedish mountains or whatever. It's this blend here where you could argue at this point the band was kind of a black and death metal band, but again, like there's like kind of a difference between some of the earlier tracks and the later tracks. And that kind of gives this album like an interesting like two sides to it, where, you know, later albums, or at least one later album, would definitely go more in another direction. This one kind of had this interesting balance to it.
Yeah, it seems like after the track Frozen is really when the death metal started to take off. But no matter what was going on musically, the one thing that I also appreciate about this band is their use of the lead playing. Now, they are not your standard insert solo here band. They're more along the lines of like an In Flames again, where they use the lead guitar to create great melodies and, you know, a little bit of excitement, but don't hold on to it too long. And that's nice, because sometimes, while I love guitar playing, you know, sometimes sections and things can run on, or no matter how cool something is, you can always run the risk of repeating it and having it sound boring. Their use of leads and harmonic melodies throughout this seemed to be pretty perfect. They were just the right amount, and they were the exact thing that sounded great over top of that track.
And they were good about, like, you know, transitioning those lead harmonies into solos. There's not a tremendous amount of solos on here. Like, most of this is just about, like, awesome riff work. And, you know, definitely some cool atmosphere, too. But, man, the riffs on this album shined. But how they would take, like, you know, a run of those, like, again, like, folky, harmonized, you know, lead melodies and kind of use those as a launching point into a solo. There's a couple of moments in here where it does that. It's like, dude, that's just a grand way to build into a solo. Like, the solo doesn't kind of come out of nowhere. It's building from some richly dynamic, you know, just killer part. And that makes these songs very memorable. Like, across the board, you know, this album is just loaded with hooks, really clever songwriting. And honestly, like, the only thing I could really fault it on is maybe the interludes. And I might say that it is a little bit front-loaded. Like, Somberlane and Black Horizons are, I think, probably the best tracks on here. But that isn't to say the back half isn't good. It's just a little bit different. Like, again, it kind of sounds like it has a little bit more of a death metal sound to it. And while I think they did a great job there, it's those first two tracks as a launching point that it really makes this just kind of like a little bit top heavy. Outside of that, though, no complaints. This is, you know, an absolute must listen to in terms of melodic black metal, black and death metal. I don't know what you would call them at this point. I would call this album awesome. Overall, this is a 4.5 for me. I love pretty much every second on it. And yeah, like the interludes, yeah, they get in the way, whatever. But honestly, like, if someone put this on, it's like, no, play it all the way through, I'll listen to the interludes. The production on it is great, too. I think Dan Swano, again, just knows how to capture that, and he keeps it very organic.
Dan does what Dan does.
He's Dan the man.
Dan the man Swano.
Yeah. If you have never jammed this album for whatever reason, and honestly, if you like melodic black metal, you know, black and death metal, there's a good chance you've listened to a ton of bands that probably drew a lot of influence from this album. Check this out. Monstrous start for this band.
And I agree with Nick. I gave this a 4.5 out of 5. Its blend of fast technical riffs, melodic epic parts, great atmosphere, and the incredible range of dynamics that this album offers is a must listen to. I am somebody that can sometimes get bored very easily, but this was a very easy and enjoyable listen. And if you are a fan of anything black metal or death metal, you have to let this ring your eardrums at least once.
So this album was very well received in the underground. I mean, you know, we're still talking about it because it's an absolutely legendary debut. And of course, they wanted to do some touring on this, but early on, they kind of ran into some problems with this lineup. Zwelsloot became less present in the band. He apparently was just skipping rehearsals, and they had to cancel gigs because he wouldn't show up. That pretty much culminated in him being fired from the band in April of 1994 and being replaced by Johan Norman, who played in the band Satanized, which was a side project of John Nodvite's. I haven't jammed that band, but Satan's kind of a big theme in this. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me that he had a band called Satanized. So not long after Johan joined the band, they already just went right back to work, started demoing material pretty much all throughout November of 1994, and they would end up signing with Nuclear Blast Records. Hey. They're kind of moving up into the big leagues here. Well, all right, prospective big leagues. I don't know how big Nuclear Blast... I think they were still like kind of a mail order label at this point, but still, you know, a bigger label, bigger distribution. They were going to get their name out there a little bit more. And they ended up returning to the studio in March of 1995, 13 days this time in the studio.
Ooh, unlucky 13. Did they do it on purpose? I don't know.
Oh, a lot of unlucky stuff would follow after this album dropped, but we'll get there. But anyway, on November 17th, 1995, they release Storm of the Light's Bane. Once again, produced by Dan Swano and different in terms of production. This album really went for the black metal sound more. It's colder, it's icier, there's more reverb on stuff. The atmosphere, it just has the black metal sound. But it also still has the tropes that you would expect from a Dan Swano produced album. It is still very crisp sounding, everything is mixed well, the levels are great, the guitars, way icier sounding, like they're a little bit more gainy, a little bit more sizzly. Drums are nice and prominent in the mix. And the addition of just a little bit more reverb this time, they became pretty much a black metal band with this album.
This album was excellent to me as it was a continuation in my mind of the Somberland. It had a similar vibe, but it was also very different. Gone are these acoustic standalone pieces. They are finally integrated into the songs, which I think gives them, once again, another color to add from the palette. And it also just makes it more a part of the album. It doesn't feel so standoutish, or so out of place maybe to just have this 1 minute piece of something and then back into the metal. They incorporated it into the songs, which once again, I felt like they should have done in the first place on the first album. So I was very happy to hear that. But this, once again, as Nick said, this had that cold, dark, atmospheric vibe, and that made this album very special. While there is only, I think, 6 songs on this, they are all excellent, and each one has its own kind of voice and uniqueness to it. It doesn't really get into the category of, okay, I heard this track, this is very similar to track 2, or so on and so forth. Each track on this album has its own life force, so to speak.
Yeah, and I mean, the flow of this album is amazing too. Like, this album kind of just breezes by, but in a good way, to the point where, like, oh my God, that was absolutely amazing. I'm just going to start it right from the start again. And that is me saying something too, because this has an intro and an outro, and I like them both.
And he doesn't care, folks. He doesn't care.
They're musical. They lead in the songs well. And I'll be honest, Night's Blood, one of my favorite black metal songs ever. Fuck, the riffs on that song are so damn good. And this still shows off, again, their creativity in terms of, like, songwriting, the rich dynamics. There's even some synths peppered in too. But on here, everything feels way more fine-tuned. The transitions are smoother. The songwriting, I think, is even bigger. The riffs and the melodies all balance each other out so well. Like, every song is essentially just like a journey of sorts. Like, and it's, never one with a happy ending, because this is all evil stuff. But they found a way to get more epic with, again, not eclipsing that whole, like, cheesiness mark. Like, everything on here, in fact, might even sound more evil than it did on the Somberland.
Now, talking about this 3 albums, I now have a new favorite song that I will listen to on repeat constantly. That is one of the fun perks about doing a lot of these retro reviews. You find certain albums or certain songs that you just start adding to the playlist and start listening to it over and over. The song Thorns of Crimson Death is one of my absolute new favorite songs. To me, it's a masterpiece. I don't know, would you say it's a little bit thrashy death metal riff in the beginning, or how would you describe that riff?
I mean, dude, like, there's a lot of thrash metal riffs, but again, it's integrated, like, really well to the point where it still kind of captures that blackened atmosphere. That song in particular, I think, is probably one of the most dynamic in terms of, like, just crazy transitions, but again, they all really work. Like, it's a little bit more mid-tempo. This one has the epic vibe.
Yes.
All over it, and it's a build.
Maybe that's why I like it. The epicness is off the charts, and that riff, that main verse riff, is just makes me want to, like, I don't know, pick up some weights or do something manly.
Charge downhill into a village with, like, torches and dynamite strapped to your body.
We're here to burn something. I don't know what we're burning, but damn it, we're going to burn it. Not a church, folks. Not a church.
Well, not yet. Baby steps. I think the guitar playing on here is even more intricate too. I want to say they were starting to play a little bit more with counter melodies too. So all the melodies didn't sound like they were, like, plucked off of, like, Just Erase, that style of, like, melodeath. There's some more, again, like, more distant atonal stuff that kind of gets worked in, but they still manage to find a hook all the time. And I love the flat out aggression on this album too. Like the thrashier, meaner songs, especially Retribution, Storm of the Lightsbane. My God, the playing on that song is just flat out vicious. Like the picking speed is insane on some of those thrashy sections. Same thing with Soul Reaper too. That song is just cold and mean and fast as hell.
I wonder if John was still alive, where he would be in the pantheon of guitarists, because while he wasn't a very nice man, he was a very talented man. And yes, as Nick said, playing was never the issue with him. And he was very good. And for the limited access we have to him, we're seeing a lot of talent shine through. So one of the questions that just kept popping into my mind was, man, if he wasn't dead and he wasn't in jail, would he be able to continue that success? Would he be one of these titan guitar players that we talk about? Or where would he end up in like kind of the pantheon of some of these metal guitar players? Because I do think he was a talent cut short, obviously.
I mean, honestly, with the limited amount of music we have by him, like he's kind of up there. Like musically, he is regarded very highly in black metal. Other stuff, well, we'll get into that. There are points on this album in particular that I would almost call his songwriting and playing on here bordering on progressive. Like the number of transitions and how well things are integrated. Like, again, this is not black metal that kind of like hangs on the more raw aspects and kind of relies more on the atmosphere to kind of drive the point home that they are spooky and evil. This crafts amazing, huge songs that, again, stand apart from one another and are just loaded with musical talent. Like, this is not an album where even, like, I would say, like, the biggest, like, detractor of black metal could say, like, yeah, this band's got no talent, this sucks. They might say it sucks, but it's like, yeah, you gotta admit, though, these guys can play. This, honestly, is one of my favorite black metal albums ever. I would say both this and the Somberlane are essential listens, but if I had to pick one, it's this one. And this is a 5 across the board. This album I have no issues with at all. I can't even find a thing that I don't like on here, and I have jammed this album so many damn times that, believe me, if I really wanted to find something I didn't like, I put some effort into it, and I can't. It's amazing start to finish. This is some of the best songwriting, I think, in terms of Scandinavian black metal across the board. And I love a lot of classic albums, but man, this one is flat out special. Night's Blood, still one of my favorite songs by this band. I've heard both black metal and death metal bands cover it, and yeah, it's an absolute staple right there. Like, if that song doesn't make you a fan of this album, I'm almost sorry. You should listen to it anyway. Fuck your opinion right there. Just listen to the rest of the fucking album. It's absolutely amazing. But yeah, this is an absolutely essential listen across the board. And again, I would say it is pretty much perfect.
Yeah, I have to agree. I am not just trying to copy what he's saying, but I do agree this is a 5 out of 5 album. Once again, I'm blown away at the fact I've never heard anything off of it. And then I was incredibly surprised and happy to have some songs on here that I can't wait to jam on repeat. Everything about this album was a enhancement from the first, which was a great start to begin with. It usually happens like that. I think we find that out a lot as we review these albums, and as you watch our videos, you kind of see that a lot of times the freshman effort is great, but that sophomore effort usually just is like killer. And this was no exception. The sophomore effort was killer. It is a perfect blend of melody, black metal, coldness, technical riffing, and even with all these different elements of it, it never goes over the top or never crawls into cringy land. It's downright a masterpiece. I must say that.
So yeah, they released what I would say is one of the best black metal albums of all time here. And how do you follow that up? Well, we're going to get into some really, really dark stuff, or at least the first batch of dark stuff with this band. But first, a little bit of setup. During the summer of 1995, John decided to join a satanic organization. That's right. He joined the Boy Scouts of America. No, just kidding. No, they were called the Misanthropic Luciferian Order. I think they ended up changing their name to the Temple of the Black Light, like it fucking mattered. Yeah, John became really vested in this whole like hyper Satanism thing, and it was kind of a distraction at this point. I'll circle back to that little club here in a minute, but in terms of the release of the album, it got ravish reviews. It became, quite hyped up, and, rightfully so. It's an amazing album. Now, in terms of touring, I don't think they were able to get right down to it because right before the album was released, the drummer, left the band. He was replaced by Tobias Kellgren. He was also in Satanized, so John already kind of knew him. And they would begin touring this album for the next 2 years. They toured with Darkthrone, Cradle of Filth, Satyricon, In Flames, Dimmaborger. A lot of big acts. But outside of John, joining his satanic Rotary Club or whatever the hell it was, there was also some drama brewing in the band. Peter ended up quitting the band. Just flat out, he was replaced by John's brother Emil on bass. Johan ended up disappearing for a time. They weren't able to find him or contact him, and that was due to him also being involved in Temple of the Thing or whatever the fuck it is. He tried to make a clean break of this group, and they were like, no, once you're in forever. And he was trying to hide out because he legit thought they were going to kill him. Now, Tobias was kind enough to kind of cover for him and, oh, no, I haven't seen him. I'm not telling John where this dude is just because, they're all kind of crazy on this thing. But the main thing is during this point when they should be really celebrating the success of this album and the fact that they're getting some much deserved notoriety for their musical talent, a lot of stuff was bubbling under the surface, and a lot of it centered around John becoming hyper obsessed. So we're going to move ahead to December 18th, 1997. In news of the world, I turned 19 on that day. In other news of the world, John and his buddy / psychopath, Vlad, aka Victor Draconi, aka Frater Nimedeal. I don't know. Why the hell's this guy got so many damn names? Or probably aliases so that, he's harder to find. Anyway, they were arrested for the murder of one Joseph Ben Mador, a 37-year-old gay man, which this famously became known as the Kahlers Park murder. So, in July of 1997, a body was actually discovered in Kahlers Park. Was shot twice, once in the head, once in the chest, and they were kind of searching around for suspects for this because it was kind of unclear. Joseph, they originally thought it was, the gentleman's boyfriend at the time. Could have been, jealous spat, blah, blah, blah. Generally that's the first person you kind of look at. Watch any episode of Perry Mason, Matlock, any cop show. The spouse is generally the first one on the list. They also theorized that it might have been a political killing too, because Joseph was vehemently against militant Islamic groups. They didn't get their first break for this case that really led anywhere until December 15th of 1997, when Vlad's girlfriend filed a complaint against him for abuse and threats. And because Vlad is clearly an idiot and liked to brag, he also bragged about killing someone with his buddy John.
Criminal 101. Do not tell people who were not involved with your crime about your crime.
Yeah.
Duh.
So, because of this tip-off, Vlad and John were brought in for questioning, and, well, all right, both of their stories differed in terms of the account, and most of that came down to who shot the guy in the head. Neither one of them wanted to fess up to the very obvious kill shot. But in terms of overlapping stuff in terms of their interrogations, it came down to them saying that they were drunk and they were in the streets of Gothenburg, and Joseph ended up accosting them. And then somehow that curtailed into a discussion about Satanism because Joseph was fascinated with the fact that they were Satanists. Now, they knew that Joseph was gay, and both of them in their interrogations cited that as a negative. And that becomes a kind of a relevant point later. But I guess they kind of decided what they were going to do not too long after they met him. They ended up having this discussion, and John said, well, we can have this discussion at my apartment. And I guess right before they got there, Joseph kind of got the sense that, hey, these crazy Satanists that are inviting me over their place after I just met them might be a little sketchy. I probably shouldn't go in here.
Note to self. If you're ever out and about drunken one night and you run into two Satanists, do not go over to their house, do not socialize with them, and for the love of God, do not accost them. Although I don't believe they actually accosted them. I just think that was part of their story.
Yeah. Also, maybe, be extra hesitant when one of them goes back in his apartment to well, fetch a taser and a gun. Now, I'm not sure if that is Vlad's take or John's take, but somewhere during this time, a gun and a taser was acquired, and they ended up, saying, well, hey, we can go talk in this park, Killer's Park, and that is where the whole thing went down. And again, both of their stories differ, where one says, oh, no, I shot him in the back and tried to tase him before that. And then the other guy shot him in the head, who he's clearly worse than me somehow.
You would think these two big bad Satanists would try to just fight each other to claim who got the kill, but really they ended up just kind of pussing out and blaming each other like a bunch of cowards that they were.
And disappointing Satan, because I think Satan would probably want you to own up to that. It's like, this was for my glory, right? Come on. Anyway, the police pretty much said that the motives seemed relatively unclear. They weren't sure whether or not it was a hate crime or it was a satanic sacrifice. But the common thread that they picked up on was both of them cited, Joseph's sexuality as a negative. They definitely did not like gay people. And, while they were turning on each other for the glory of Satan, they pretty much compiled that as a common thread here. And this became the first hate crime recognized by the Swedish police. So they were both convicted and sentenced to 10 years, which seems very light, but, their judicial system's different than ours. But they only ended up serving about 7 of those years, and they were both released in 2004. But that is not where Dissection's story ends. Almost immediately after John was released, he restarted Dissection with an entirely new lineup that included only members to, quote, stand behind and live up to the demands of Dissection's satanic concept. Prison changes a man, or sometimes it doesn't.
This time he walked in alone and he came out with a bunch of men's DNA inside his body. I'll let you figure out how it got there.
So John approached Thomas Askeland, ex-Dark Funeral, to join on drums, and Set Tayton, I think that's how you say that, of the band Aborum, to join in on guitars, and both apparently had the right amount of Satan Thetans in them. So that was the new lineup, and they would record the Maha Kali 2-track single with Bruce Leclerc of Night Rage as a session bassist. And during this time, they kicked off the Rebirth of Dissection tour. And admittedly, a lot of people were completely hyped about this. I mean, again, Storm of the Light's Bane, amazing album, and the promise of another album. Hey, we didn't think we would get this because we were pretty sure John was going to be rotting in a prison for, considerably a lot longer than 10 years, at least, that's what I thought. Oddly enough, and this is like sort of an interesting little note here that I came across while going into this next album. Somehow in 2005, before this album was released, Vlad somehow became the owner of the whole Dissection trademark. John's buddy that, threw him under the bus, or was it, John that threw him under the bus? Either way, it's just sort of a weird thing. Like, yeah, this guy that I committed this heinous crime with, I'm going to put him in charge of everything. Why not? That seems like a great idea.
They probably got very close in jail.
I don't know if they were allowed to share the same cell. I'd probably want to keep those two apart. They'd probably invite people to their cells, like, hey, would you like to come discuss Satanism? They're kind of like, like Jehovah's Witnesses, except there's a murder at the end.
Don't forget to bring a shank for the ceremonial goat slaughtering.
Yeah, they stabbed that leaflet right to your heart. Anyway, all this time they were working on this new album, and, Dissection would self-release this one, but it was in association with the End Records for distribution, and on April 2006, they would release Rain Chaos. I don't even really know if that's how you pronounce that album's name. I don't care, because I'm about to make a big disclaimer right here. Regardless of how I feel about this album, it has nothing to do with how I feel about John's actions. It isn't a slight because of all of the shit that he did. He could have won a Nobel Peace Prize in between Storm of the Light's Bane and this fucking turd, and I would still think that this album is boring as hell.
Because that's exactly what it is. This is drab compared to the first two. This is night and day difference. I hear a little bit, just the tiniest little sprinklings of what used to be Dissection, into some of the most bland, generic Gothenburg pop garbage ever.
I mean, the black cover, it's kind of their black album. And it's flat, it's boring, it's safe. Like, none of the songwriting dynamics that you would expect from a band that has written 2 incredible albums before this are present on here. Hell, there's barely any black metal on here. A lot of this is just sort of... It's almost kind of riff rock, and it's so fucking middle of the road.
It's every C band that loves In Flames and At the Gates. It sounds like they're just trying to make an album of mediocrity. Like, I don't know. They say jail changes a man. I don't know what the hell changed him inside here, but it wasn't for the better as far as music goes.
No, I think maybe like the only thing in the prison library to listen to in terms of music were copies of Load and Reload. And maybe that was the case because, I mean, like, all right, Dark Mother Divine. This is kind of a Load, Reload-ish song, or at least in comparison to previous works. Like, it's so tamed down and just, again, like, very lackluster, very basic. Like, the technical edge, I would say, is also gone here. The drum performance on here...
The new drummer blows. Let's just be honest. The most boring drummer in the world. A drum machine could have the exact same effect.
This dude was collecting a paycheck. Like, this is a Lars-level performance. All right, maybe not quite that bad. But in terms of, like, any sort of character to the drum work, anything to, you know, like, add to the, you know, dynamics that honestly aren't present on this album anywhere, there's nothing there. And that is kind of this whole album. Like, there's some decent songs, like Starless Aeon. Admittedly, that's probably one of the few songs I really like on there. I think it does have some really good melodies, but again, it's very basic. Like, it sounds like it could have popped up on like a later In Flames album, like Reroute to Remain or something like that.
Very formulaic.
Yeah. But after Starless Aeon, like, this album slides. Like, it doesn't even sound like the same band that started this album. Because, to its credit, it at least gets off to, you know, like, a more energetic start. Like, again, like, you kind of figure out that this is not the same Dissection you were kind of hoping for. But as the album goes on, it gets more bland. Like, anything dark or sinister on this album is just stripped away, especially on Dark Mother Divine. Like, that song sounds like Dissection just got sober and found Jesus.
Which is very against their original mission. Like, how can they only find musicians that can hold true to their Satanist bullshit and then come off with some of the softest shit that they've ever done? It makes no sense. Another thing that really kind of irked me about this album was when you hear his vocal delivery on this album, you can hear the lyrics more clearly. By the way, Vlad wrote all the lyrics for this album, by the way. I don't know why, but he did. And they are so fucking cringy. These guys really believe they were some kind of demons or some shit. They were all into their own applesauce, and they just ate it by the spoonful, man.
There were, like, flirtations with different styles, too. Like, Mahakali actually has, like, female vocals. There's some more heavy metal-ish gallops and harmonies on it. It kind of feels like evil, cheesy power metal, and it's a little overly long, too. I tried to come from, like, an outsider perspective. Like, I own this album. And I don't come back to it really ever. But every now and then I try to, like, give it a second chance to see if, like, all right, maybe I heard it wrong. Maybe it doesn't suck. Maybe if I don't think of this as a Dissection album, that might help. And that's still kind of maybe there. The bright spots are few and far between on here. And, well, yeah, like, I think the title track is a pretty decent instrumental. It's mostly because I didn't have to hear, like, cringy satanic lyrics that, you know, it's just, they're dumb. They're really dumb. And again, Starless Aeon. But outside of that, like, there's nothing on here that makes me think of Dissection. And it fucking says Dissection on the album. And I'm not the only one that had, like, super high expectations for this. I remember this being, like, chatted about everywhere on, you know, metal zines and such. Like, oh my God, Dissection's back. And needless to say, like, this was probably a huge letdown for most people. Like, I know this album's probably got its fans. I'm not one of them. And I'm not gonna, you know, kind of glaze over my disappointment. I was fucking just completely just bummed out. That was like, really? This is it? Man.
So to give this album a rating, I feel like I was a little kinder to this album than Nick was. I give it a 2.5 out of 5. It was really boring. I don't want to listen to it again, but if I'm being honest, production was decent. There weren't things terribly wrong with it other than the songs just kind of sucked and were boring. It was put together well from a production standpoint. It was decent, just not as powerful as the other productions. So I'm trying to be kind with that in mind. Ooh, I didn't even mean for that to rhyme. Ooh, it was almost a triple there. But anyway, I digress. I kind of want to give it a 2, but I'm going to stick with my 2.5. Like he said earlier when he was talking about it, there is some magic there in little spurts, but it's very few, far in between. And just overall, not a good album.
No. And I initially was at a 1.5, but I'm gonna give it a 2. Like, it does have a few moments on here. I don't like the production. Like, it just feels sterile. Like it was trying to clean up after a murder.
Maybe so.
Maybe. But no, like it's very lifeless sounding. And again, like the songs just plod. All the hallmarks of this band's amazing sound earlier on it basically can't be found on here. And yeah, like this kind of comes across as like a mellow death black and roll sort of hybrid, and like nothing really jumps off the page much. Maybe the idea was to do something different, a fresh approach. Different doesn't always equal good. And sometimes different equals career-altering decision in terms of like the fan base. Because again, I know I wasn't the only one that thought this was kind of a lie. Like it shouldn't have the Dissection logo on there. Maybe this should have been saved for a separate project, but, they were gung-ho about getting the Dissection brand back out there. But yeah, I don't like this album for the most part. Again, it has some moments, some potential, but yeah, again, like, I don't know, like none of the invigoration. Like this felt like it could have been slapped together in like a few weeks. Like, yeah, these riffs are like everything you were hearing in Flames and Dark Tranquility and At the Gates, but with like a little bit of like satanic fucking Metallica boogie in there. None of that is what I wanted from Dissection. So yeah, this one, yeah, it's the redheaded stepchild of their entire short discography. So as I said, I'm not the only one that thinks this album's kind of a fucking turkey. The reviews for Rancast were mixed, pretty bad. But that wasn't going to stop Dissection from touring. In fact, in May, which is when the album dropped here in the US, they announced, they were going to do a short tour, and then after that, Dissection was done. That was going to be it. 2 of these dates were actually going to be in the US, but they were denied access because, well, John's a convicted murderer. I think we already went over that, so yeah, they didn't want him here. Kind of understand it. But they ended up playing their final show June 24th, 2006 in Stockholm, right on Midsummer, which was, kind of cool. Like, all right, we kind of tied that all together. And then all was quiet up until August 13th, 2006. John ended up taking his own life in what could be described as a satanic ritual. I remember seeing this article pop up and then reading all of the details. He used a shotgun, and he was surrounded in a circle of candles with a open satanic grimoire in front of him. And I mean, if you go through, some of his interviews, his views on unaliving oneself were interesting to say the least.
It's what he wanted to do. He felt like it was completing the circle of his life, so to speak. He felt like he had done everything that he was able to do and lived his life to the fullest. And now the only joy or last thing to do in his life, the ultimate slap to the big guy upstairs, would be to take your own life and enjoy your remaining days with the Dark One below. He was a weird dude.
He was weird.
Clearly
dude.
Psychotic.
Yeah. And, needless to say, Dissection was going to break up after that. They probably broke up maybe a little bit before that. I don't know, but Dissection is done. And yeah, it leaves behind what I would call like a tarnished legacy. Like my love for the music, all right, minus the last one, is undying. Like, I've been a fan ever since I heard them. I think that is some of the most influential in terms of like black metal and blackened death metal to a degree too. Like, those two albums are incredible. And I hear like dissection worship all the time. There's probably like subsets of black metal that are pretty much described as like flat out dissection worship. And I love that sound. It's a big part of me getting into black metal. But at the same time, when it comes down to the band itself, yeah, like I love the band, but John is a very divisive figure to say the least. Like, I think what he did was flat out scummy. And whether he fired the fatal shot or not, yeah, no, that's part of his legacy too. So this is like one of those like separating the art from the artist. You know, it's kind of difficult to, you know, weigh my fandom against, I don't know, like my fucking morals there. Because, yeah, I think that was just kind of flat out shitty. And if, you know, a couple of people were to come up to me and with two different opinions on it, like, yeah, Dissection's amazing, and I love, you know, John and blah, blah, blah. Or someone said, yeah, Dissection's amazing. Also, John's a piece of shit. The only thing I could say is, I agree.
Murder's bad, okay? If you commit murder, you are bad, okay? The one thing I can say about John is, even though he was a piece of shit, at least he wrote some bangers, and that's way more than Varg Vikernes can say, because he's a piece of shit, and his music is shit.
Burzum's trash. So, if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We also have memberships now. They're only 99 cents, and we offer a members-only live stream, which we will be doing that at some point this month, and we'll try to think of like some fun subject to talk about, either that, or we can just hang out and talk once again, because that's always fun, and we say goofy shit. We also have goofy, dumb emojis too, which I know I gotta add another one. I have some ideas, and again, I kind of want to use AI art because I don't want to ask an actual artist to draw any of the stupid shit in my head that I'm thinking of, because there are far better things for any prospective artist to do out there. Trust me. Anyway, the memberships are essentially the new way to support the channel as we're trying to get away from Patreon more. We also still have our store, thrallsmetal.com, with our t-shirts and hats. There's a link down below to that in the video description. And, you know, there's the join button if you choose to be a member of this whole thing and brag to your friends that you're a member of Thralls of Metal.
That's right.
I don't know if that's like a good flex or a bad flex. It's kind of maybe a medium flex. I don't know. I might be highballing it at medium there.
We'll let you decide. And the most important part in my mind of every video is thanking each and every one of you that takes the time out of your day, or takes the time consistently out of your day to hang out with us, listen to what we have to say, and give your opinion on all things that we love, which is metal. You are the reason we do this. You are the reason for the season. And we are so thankful for each and every one of you. And as we're approaching 20,000, it just continues to grow, man. Out of nowhere, this little flower has sprouted, and we couldn't be any more thrilled, thankful, and excited for it.
We also have a giveaway going on, too, for when we do eventually hit 20,000 subscribers, which we are, I believe, less than 40 away from that right now. We have a whole package of CDs. We have one of our shirts, our hats, a whole bunch of download codes. All you have to do is comment on that video, and that should be playing automatically on our channel as soon as you go to it. But yeah, tons of content coming down the pipe, you know, rankings, more retro reviews, more actual reviews, just tons of stuff. And yeah, we hope you dig it. And yeah, we're looking forward to interacting with you guys in the future. So one more big thank you, because you guys are awesome, and we will catch you later.